I'm Christy. Today I want to talk about supporting loved ones with cognitive impairment. Another category of disability is cognitive disabilities. Other names include intellectual disability, mental impairment, or cognitive impairment. This category of disability gets pretty confusing pretty quickly. There are a number of different names or ways to address this disability. Cognitive impairment, cognitive disability, mental impairment, intellectual disability, developmental delay. And there are probably others that I haven't remembered off the top of my head. According to the FCC, quote, cognitive disabilities is a term that refers to a broad range of conditions that include intellectual disability, autism spectrum disorders, severe persistent mental illness, brain injury, stroke, and Alzheimer's disease and other dementias, end quote. You can find a link to their website over on the blog. That's at www.havenofhopeforme.com. This originally posted in January of 2023. The Michigan Alliance for Families defines cognitive impairment this way. Quote, a cognitive impairment, also known as an intellectual disability, is a term used when a person has certain limitations in mental functioning and in skills such as communication, self-help, and social skills, end quote. You can find a link to their page over on the blog. This article focuses on explaining various aspects of a child's life that cognitive impairment may impact. It also explains how the term developed. Regardless of how you refer to it, the basic issue with cognitive disabilities is that the brain doesn't function in the same way that a typical individual's does. DisabledWorld.com defines it this way, quote, broadly speaking, a cognitive disability is a variety of medical conditions affecting cognitive ability. This is a broad concept encompassing various intellectual or cognitive deficits, including intellectual disability, deficits too mild to properly qualify as intellectual disability, various specific conditions such as specific learning disability, and problems acquired later in life through acquired brain injuries or neurodegenerative diseases like dementia, end quote. The article goes on to further define 6 different types of cognitive disabilities, along with a brief explanation of how to diagnose a cognitive disability. Living with some form of cognitive impairment impacts life to some degree. The degree of impact will depend on the severity of the impairment. It will also depend on the type or cause of the impairment and when it started. For example, if the impairment happens at birth or in early childhood, it is likely that more aspects of life will be impacted, and that impact is more likely to last for the individual's lifetime. On the other hand, if an event occurs later in life, such as a traumatic brain injury, some skills may be relearned with sufficient time, therapy, and hard work by the individual. As far as the aspects of life impacted by cognitive impairment, the short answer is that any and every aspect is possible. It all depends on the type and severity of the disability. For example, autism spectrum disorders significantly impact social awareness and interactions. In young children, it can easily impact all aspects of life because the child has trouble interacting with others and the environment around them in order to learn new skills. With appropriate early interventions, many of these children are able to overcome many of the delays and begin to function closer to their same age peers. However, many of these same children continue to struggle with social interactions into adulthood because their disability prevents them from easily and appropriately learning to read social cues. These individuals may be able to overcome many of these issues with continued support, encouragement, and hard work, but it is possible they will struggle to some degree for their entire lives. Now, I'm very familiar with cognitive impairment because it's what AJ struggles with most. One of AJ's first diagnoses was developmental delay. He participated in early intervention services from probably about a year old. He began attending school in our school district as soon as he turned 3. AJ was in his self-contained classes throughout his school years and was able to remain in our district for an additional 4 years because he graduated with an adjusted, not a regular, diploma. Over the years, he has consistently tested with a lower IQ. He has trouble focusing on the task at hand, understanding multiple step directions, and following conversations that are not specifically addressed to him. He also struggles to answer questions, often because he doesn't understand what's being asked at first. He takes longer to process the information given to him, so it can appear he's ignoring you or not answering you, when in fact he's trying to figure out what you asked him so he can answer your question. While AJ had struggled with coordination issues and accomplished most developmental milestones late, his cognitive issues impacted his physical delays. Today, he still struggles with some communication issues. His pronunciations are not always clear or accurate, which makes for some interesting and often entertaining misunderstandings. He also hesitates to answer questions others pose to him and will look to me for answers. Fortunately, I'm smart enough not to answer for him and usually rephrase the question to get him to answer it. But it does mean that answering questions for him takes longer than you would initially expect. As we wrap up this discussion on cognitive impairments, I want to reemphasize a few key points. First, cognitive impairment may impact nearly every aspect of life. The impairment severity will also impact the area or areas and the type of impact it will have on an individual's life. Some issues may not have an impact on the remainder of an individual's life. Some types of cognitive impairment, like dementia or brain injury, may not happen until adulthood or even later in life. And finally, it is possible to work to minimize the impact that some cognitive impairments have on an individual's life. I could go on and on about cognitive impairment. In some ways, I think this may be one of the harder disabilities to live with. Sometimes your loved one simply cannot understand that they are unable to do something they really want to do, or you're unable to help them understand what they need to do in order to learn a new skill. But then my perspective is probably a bit skewed because of my interactions with AJ. Seeking to understand the issues your loved one struggles with proves that you value them and helping them is important. And in the end, that's when everyone wins. So my question for you this week is this: does your loved one have a cognitive disability? How does it impact their daily life? I'd love to hear about your life. You can leave me a comment below. You can leave me a comment over on the blog. Again, that's at www.havenofhopeforme.com. This was originally posted in January of 2023. If you prefer, you can always email me at Christy, CHRISTY, at havenofhopeforme.com. I'm seeking to better understand the breadth of cognitive disabilities so that I can continue to say that life is good and there is never a dull moment.